Vivian Caldwell was 39 years old when the envelope arrived, and the man who sent it had no idea that he had just made the most expensive mistake of his life. To look at her, you would not have guessed much. She drove a sensible silver sedan. She kept a modest two-bedroom house on a quiet street in Charlotte, North Carolina, with a vegetable garden out back and a porch that needed one new board on the left side she had never gotten around to replacing. She wore her hair natural and her clothes clean and pressed, and when she spoke in the kind of measured voice that most people mistake for quietness instead of what it actually was, which was precision. His name was Dominic. He had been her husband for 9 years. He had, in those 9 years, signed his name to bank accounts she managed, eaten at restaurants she quietly owned through a holding company, and worn cufflinks she had bought him from a jeweler whose lease was in her name. He had believed he was the successful one in the marriage. He had encouraged that belief the way a man tends a fire he did not start and cannot explain. The envelope was an invitation, cream-colored. Embossed, it came addressed to her, which told her everything she needed to know about his intentions, and the card inside informed her that Dominic Caldwell and Miss Tara Winslow would be celebrating their engagement the following Saturday at the Alderton Club on Tryon Street. There was a handwritten note on the back in his careful script. It said, "Come see what you lost." What Dominic did not know was that Vivian was a maritime logistics executive who had spent 11 years quietly building a private fleet and the company that operated it, and that the company's combined asset value, as of the last fiscal quarter, sat at $90 million. What happened at the Alderton Club that Saturday would settle every open question he had ever had about who she was. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning she received the envelope, Vivian was in the garden before 7, pressing her thumbs into the soil around a row of late-season tomatoes she had planted in April. Her father had started that garden. It had been his habit every spring before the heat came in to lay out rows of staked tomatoes and pole beans and to work the soil in the early morning when the light was still soft and the air had not yet made up its mind about the day. When he passed, 3 years ago, she had kept the garden. Not out of sentiment exactly, though there was some of that. More because she found that the physical work of maintaining something, tending it, staking it, cutting back what had gone wrong, was the work she understood best. Her father, Everett Caldwell, had been a merchant marine officer. He had spent 30 years at sea, navigating cargo routes through weather and darkness and diplomatic complication. And he had raised her on the principle that the sea rewarded the prepared and punished the careless without preference for either. He used to tell her, standing exactly where she was standing now, that a woman who understood logistics understood power. Know where everything is, he would say. Know how it moves. Know what it costs. And always, always know your exits before you need them. She had taken that to heart. She had met Dominic at a fundraising gala for the Port Authority 10 years ago. He had been charming in the way of men who understand the function of charm as a tool deployed strategically, producing results. He had been a commercial real estate developer then, third-generation money from his mother's side, with a firm that was doing modestly well and a talent for making modest success sound enormous. She had liked him. That was true. He had been funny, and he had asked her good questions about her work, and he had remembered her answers the next time they spoke, which she had taken as a sign of genuine interest and which she would later understand as preparation. She had her own company by then. Her father had co-signed the original loan and helped her negotiate her first 2 contracts with cargo handlers out of Wilmington. By the time she met Dominic, she had 3 vessels under management, a staff of 12, and revenue that made her comfortable enough to not talk about it. She had learned early that wealth announced aloud had a way of producing the wrong kind of attention. She had not announced it to Dominic. She had let him assume, pleasantly, that she was a corporate administrator with a company car and a steady salary, because he had never asked anything specific enough to require her to correct him, and because her father had told her, let them show you who they are before you show them what you have. She had been watching for 2 years now. What she had seen had been clarifying. The key appeared first. She noticed it in October on the ring he set beside the bathroom sink every night. A house key that was not to their house. Brass, bright, and new. On a ring of its own that he kept separated from his others. She said nothing. She noted it. In November, she began to hear him on his phone after midnight. His voice low and careful, carrying through the walls of the house in a frequency she recognized as the register of a man who believed he was not being heard. In December, the bank notification arrived. Vivienne had set up the joint account when they married as a gesture of good faith. She had never needed the account. Her business finances and personal funds ran through structures Dominic had no access to and no knowledge of, but she had put enough in it to make the marriage look ordinary and to give him a place to put his income. The notification told her that the account balance had been reduced by $11,000 in 4 transfers over as many weeks, each one moving to an account she did not recognize. She did not call the bank. She went to her laptop. She opened a spreadsheet that had nothing in it. She typed in the date of the first transfer. Her hands did not shake. She had been raised by a man who navigated storms with instruments, not instincts, and she was her father's daughter in exactly the ways that mattered now. By January, she had reconstructed 8 months of transfers, $43,000 in total, moved in amounts small enough to avoid automatic flagging, but patterned enough, when you looked at the full picture, to read clearly as deliberate. She had cross-referenced the transfers against Dominic's calendar, against the hotel charges that appeared on the shared credit card he used for what he called client entertainment, against the fuel receipts from weekends when he said he was in Greenville visiting a friend from college who, she confirmed with a single phone call she made from the parking lot of her office, had not seen Dominic in nearly 3 years. She had pulled a security photograph from the parking structure attached to his office, obtained through a contact she had in property management, showing a woman arriving and leaving with Dominic on 4 separate occasions over 6 months. The woman was tall and blonde and drove a white Range Rover, and her name, which Vivienne found without particular difficulty, was Tara Winslow. She sat in her office on a Tuesday afternoon in late January with a folder on her desk that contained 41 pages of documentation, and she looked at the city through the glass, and she thought about her father at the helm in a bad season, reading the sky, reading the instruments, deciding without panic what was necessary. She opened a drawer and removed the second phone from its case. She powered it on for the first time in 6 months. She made a call. "Felicia," she said, "it's time. I need you to pull everything together." Felicia Thorne had been Vivienne's attorney for 7 years, and before that she had been her father's attorney. And she was the kind of woman who had built a practice on the premise that her clients should never have to explain themselves twice. She met Vivienne in her office the following Thursday with 2 paralegals, a pot of strong coffee, and the expression of someone who had been waiting for this call. Vivienne laid the folder on the conference table, and Felicia did not flinch. They worked for 4 hours. Felicia confirmed what Vivienne had suspected, that the $43,000 constituted marital waste under North Carolina law, and that the pattern of deliberate concealment would be relevant to asset division. She went further. 2 years before Vivienne's marriage, Dominic had been party to a civil suit in Mecklenburg County involving misrepresentation in a real estate deal, settled quietly, the records sealed, but not so sealed that a thorough attorney could not find the thread and pull it. The settlement alone suggests a pattern, Felicia said. But the asset question is where you have the leverage. He has no idea what you're actually worth. He has no idea, Vivienne confirmed. Then the question, Felicia said, spreading her hands flat on the table in a gesture Vivienne had always found efficient and reassuring, is how you want to do this. Vivienne thought about the cream envelope on her kitchen counter. The handwritten note. Come see what you lost. I want to answer his invitation, she said. She left Felicia's office and drove directly to the home of her uncle, Raymond Caldwell, her father's youngest brother, who lived in a ranch house in Gastonia and had opinions about everything and was almost always right. Raymond had been a labor relations director for 31 years and had the particular skill of reading a room without appearing to look. He had watched Dominic across dinner tables for 9 years and had never fully relaxed in the man's presence, which was something he had mentioned once, 2 years into the marriage, and which Vivienne had filed away precisely as the piece of information it was. He listened to everything she said without interrupting, which was one of the things she had always loved about him. Your father knew, Raymond said when she finished. He used to say that Dominic was a man who admired things he hadn't built. Said it twice. He never told me. He wouldn't. He raised you to see for yourself. Raymond looked at his hands. You know what you're doing. You're going to do it right. Don't let him bait you into performing anger. Anger is information, and you don't owe him your information. She drove back to Charlotte as the sun went down and the city came on in lights along the highway, and she thought that her uncle was correct about most things, and this was not an exception. Real power operated in quiet rooms. The showing was just the occasion. That week, Felicia's team completed a full forensic accounting review of the joint account and the marital finances, a process that produced a report of considerable specificity, including a notation that 17 of the $43,000 had been transferred on dates that corresponded exactly to charges on a shared card for a jeweler in South Charlotte, which Vivienne had also cross-referenced, and which had produced in a matter of a few calls placed by Felicia's office. The information that the jeweler's receipts showed a diamond engagement ring purchased by Dominic Caldwell 5 weeks before the cream envelope arrived in Vivienne's mail. He had been planning for months. He had been sitting across the dinner table and talking about his day and making small requests of her. The dry cleaning, the cable bill, the calendar reminder for his mother's birthday, while carrying a plan in his chest that he believed she could not see. She had spent 11 years building a company by anticipating what people could not see coming. She had spent 2 years seeing this coming. The week before the engagement party, Vivienne continued her routine without variation. She made dinner on Tuesday. She asked Dominic about a project in Concord he had mentioned. She let him believe that the envelope had landed exactly as intended. He was performing confidence, and she had spent her career on water, and she knew what a vessel looked like when it was moving toward a reef it hadn't detected. Some things you don't say. You simply make certain that you are the only one in the room who knows the full chart. She made one phone call on Thursday afternoon to the captain of the Caldwell Meridian, which was a 280-foot super yacht she had acquired 3 years ago as a corporate hospitality and charter vessel, one of 4 in her fleet, and she asked him to have her positioned by 7 in the morning on the day of the party, docked at the public pier visible from the terrace of the Alderton Club, which sat on the water. The captain did not ask why. He had been with her for 6 years, and he understood preparation. The Alderton Club occupied a converted warehouse on the waterfront, 3 stories of original brick and newer glass, with a terrace that ran across the entire water facing side. Dominic had booked it without knowing that Vivienne's company held the catering contract for the venue's private events, a fact that Felicia had confirmed was legally relevant and personally satisfying. She arrived 7 minutes after the start time, dressed in a charcoal suit that she had chosen deliberately, understated, precise, the kind of clothing that read differently depending on what the person looking at it understood about her. Her hair was pinned back. She wore the only jewelry she owned that had come from her own earnings, a pair of gold earrings her father had given her the day she signed the papers on her first vessel. She had driven herself. Felicia was already inside. The room was full. Perhaps 100 people, clustered around cocktail tables and a bar at the far end. Dominic at the center in a charcoal blazer with Tara Winslow beside him in an ivory sheath dress, both of them holding champagne flutes and wearing the particular expression of a couple who had decided to perform ease, because they were not fully certain how the room would receive them. Dominic saw her when she was halfway across the floor. He did not change expression, but something shifted behind his eyes in a way she recognized from years of marriage as the expression he produced when a situation had exceeded the plan he had prepared for. He had expected her to arrive confused, or angry, or diminished. She crossed the room and stood before him with her hands quiet at her sides and said, "Congratulations, Dominic." He introduced her to Tara as his soon-to-be former wife, with the emphasis placed on soon-to-be former, as though the clarification were something he had rehearsed. Tara said nothing. She glanced toward the terrace, where the glass wall gave a full view of the water, and her expression changed first. "My God," someone near the terrace said. "What is that?" The Caldwell Meridian had come around the point just after 7 and was positioned now 200 yards out, her hull white and clean in the morning light, 4 decks visible above the waterline, the company flag flying from the stern. She was not the largest vessel in the fleet, but she was the most visible, and she had been positioned with the precision of someone who understood exactly what sightlines the terrace provided and had used them accordingly. Felicia appeared at Vivienne's side. She set a leather folder on the cocktail table between Vivienne and Dominic and opened it to the first tab. "Mr. Caldwell," Felicia said, "we have some documents we'd like you to review. I've been Mrs. Caldwell's attorney for 7 years, and I believe you'll find this review straightforward." He looked at the papers the way people look at things they were not prepared to understand. The first page was a full accounting of the joint account transfers, $43,000 across 19 months, each transaction dated and annotated. The second page was a copy of the civil suit from 9 years ago, the one he had believed was sealed well enough to stay buried. The third page was the jeweler's receipt for the engagement ring, purchased with funds from the account he shared with his wife. His mother was there. She stood by the window with a glass of water and did not speak. But she looked at the documents with the expression of a woman seeing a confirmation she had been quietly holding for years. Dominic attempted recovery in the way he had always attempted recovery, with volume and misdirection, his voice rising just enough to suggest he intended the room as an audience. "This is ridiculous," he said. "You've been building a case out of nothing." Vivienne, Dominic, Raymond Caldwell had been standing near the bar, unremarkable in a brown jacket, holding a glass of water. He said the name once, and it was enough. Dominic stopped. Raymond looked at his nephew-in-law with the patience of a man who had sat across from a great many people who believed they were better prepared than they actually were. And he said, "You prepared a very small game for a very large board. You would have known that if you had paid attention to who you married." Vivienne looked at Dominic and she saw, in the particular way of a woman who had spent 9 years and 2 years of careful watchfulness accounting for what was in front of her, that he was understanding something now that had not been available to him before. He had believed she was ordinary. He had built his exit around that belief. The belief had been the architecture of his error, and the architecture, as any engineer would tell you, fails from the foundation. You had 9 years to understand who I was, she said quietly. You chose to see what was useful to you. That choice is yours to carry. She closed the folder. She picked up her bag. She walked across the room toward the terrace door, and through the glass, the Caldwell Meridian sat on the water. Still and certain in the morning light, $90 million of what he had decided was invisible. She did not look back. The room was very quiet. 8 months had passed by the time Vivian sat on the new porch she had built at the back of her house, wider than the old one and set with teak boards she had chosen herself from a salvage supplier she used for vessel repair. The tomatoes were in again. Her father's garden had done well in the summer heat. She had hired a neighbor's daughter to help with the watering in July, and the girl had taken to it with an enthusiasm that reminded her of her father's particular pleasure in things that grew. Felicia had settled the matter in June. The joint account transfers were recovered in full. The civil suit from 9 years prior had served its purpose, providing documentation that Dominique's pattern of financial misrepresentation was not new and would be treated accordingly by the mediator. He had retained an attorney who specialized in outcomes Vivian's documentation had made unavailable. He had, at the close of the process, left the marriage with what the law required her to give him from the marital estate and nothing beyond it. She had heard, through her uncle and through the kind of ordinary information that moves through a city of this size without requiring anyone to chase it, that Dominic had listed his uptown condo and moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a complex near the airport. That his development firm had lost 2 anchor clients in the months following the party. Clients whose project managers, she suspected, had attended the Alderton Club that morning and drawn their own professional conclusions. That Tara Winslow had relocated to Atlanta and was working for a property management company at a title that suggested the relationship had not survived contact with reality. Dominic's mother had sent a card in March, handwritten and brief, which said only, "I am sorry, and I should have spoken sooner." Vivian had written back a note of 2 sentences. She harbored nothing. She had rebuilt what needed building. On the porch beside her was a man named Elijah, who was a civil engineer who had been consulting on a marina expansion project her company was developing in Beaufort. He had come to dinner in April with a set of site reports and had stayed to ask questions about her company's history in a way that she found she did not mind answering. He was quiet in the way of people who have things to think about. He made good coffee and had the kind of patience that showed not in what he said, but in what he did not rush. The Caldwell fleet had taken on its 5th vessel in September. Her operations manager had opened a new office in Savannah. She was in conversation with 2 institutional investors about an expansion she had been planning for 3 years. The morning light came in from the east and caught the dew on the tomato stakes, and the smell of the garden was green and specific and familiar. And she held her coffee in both hands and thought of her father at the helm, reading the instruments, steady in weather that had never had a chance of stopping him. She had built everything worth keeping. He had come to that party certain he was walking into an easy win. He had been right about one thing. It just wasn't the win he planned. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.